First of all, Dr. Srinivas, I would like to thank you for joining us. And for the first time, I'm seeing the breakup of your name, what the C and N stands for. We've already known you as Srinivas. So Dr. Srinivas is MD pathologist, and he also has done his DNB, and being a fellow of the College of American Pathologists, he has also been awarded the certificate in clinical laboratory management and leadership by the American Association of Clinical Chemists. He is a global outreach consultant. He is well versed with ISO 15189 and is an NABH QCI medical laboratory assessor, as well as a CAP lab assessor, inspector. He is a WHO trainer for good clinical laboratory practices and laboratory quality management systems. And he is the father of urine automation in India. And that is something, it is so great for us to be associated with you, Dr. Srinivas. He is also on the editorial board for 2 of the medical journals, trained under Dr. John Gerlach, president of the ASHI, fellowship under him in molecular diagnostics and flow cytometry and transplant immunology. His work experience is 26 years of experience in laboratory medicine, pathology, and transplantation immunology. Total quality management, laboratory operations, interpretations of the hematological histograms, scattergrams, HPLC, capillary electrophoresis, flow cytometry, and many, many more are his areas of expertise. And he is a clinical chemist also, and serology reporting, he also does serology reporting. So he's quite an all-rounder in, I would say, not only histopathology, but clinical pathology too, which would include, as it used to include, biochemistry, hematology, and microbiology as well. And of course, he is also very well versed with the histocompatibility series because he is working on transplant immunology. And over to you, Dr. Srinivas. Welcome to CAHO, and do join us not only today, but as a full member too. Over to you, Dr. Srinivas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seema Bhargav. I would like to thank CAHO, especially Dr. Barnali Das and Dr. Jayalakshmi and the team of the people at the diagnostic wing. From the perspective point of that of a laboratory personnel being an assessee, and also at the time of being a director, what problems we have encountering with the accreditation bodies at the national level, and also to just explain to ourselves that what improvement can be brought about in our accreditation bodies, and prospectively we can also think how we can join together to educate ourselves to a better performing laboratories. When a laboratory is undergoing for any of the preparation for the accreditation, the first thing comes to us is the scope. The scope of the hematology as per the defined by the criteria, specific criteria of the NABL 112 has to be looked upon. And one has to undergo what is called as an organogram to get onto this. And everything has been discussed in the previous 2 sessions by Dr. Pramod as well as Dr. Anita. So we were talking about the methodology, the materials, the manpower, the machines, and the environment itself. So in the hematology section, first I would like to put myself, what are the scope of the test which we have to include, what equipments and methodology am I using, and how will I build up my organogram to make sure that the division of the hematology has got a good head, technical or supervisors, then who will be the technologists who will be working across, defining the manpower and defining the machines and defining the environment on which we are going to work across. The red ones are the issues, the black ones are the ones which we usually bring across the scope of the hematology. The scope of the hematology includes the complete blood counts, the ESR, the smear studies, the reticulocyte count. There are few pit holes or potholes or peaks and valleys in this when it comes to the scope, because we have histochemistries, especially if you are doing PAS, MPOs, and the Sudan black for the leukemia. Still, if you are doing, then should we include the scope of the hematology, or we should just leave them alone? Hemoglobin electrophoresis with respect to gel electrophoresis or capillary electrophoresis, how will I put it? Whether should I put it in hematology or should I put it in clinical chemistry is the question. You as a director would have put it in the hematology. The assessors who come will be having a tough time in your laboratory in presence of everyone to have a small conflict to say that I will not do this, you will do this. So this goes on there. Then bone marrow aspiration and biopsy, should we put it in hematology as per the criteria laid down by 112, or should I put it in histopathology is the question. Next, coming to the coagulation, routine coagulations, PT, PTT, D-dimer, fibrinogen, and special hematology parameters, including the individual assays and flow cytometry itself. In the flow cytometry also, we have some confusions because previously it was classified as immunohematology and now it has been special flow cytometry scope. When we're talking about the flow cytometry scope, what are the parameters which we are doing should be included in that? Should I include HLA-B27, CD4, CD8? Should I get on to the histocompatibility testing, which we are doing a flow PRA, or we are doing a flow DSAs, or we are doing a flow cytometric analysis of the CD1920 to be included into the scope of the hematology is controversial. Next, coming to the issues in the bleeding time and the clotting time, there are few instances where bleeding time and clotting time are being obsolete and few time which has been used in the laboratory to make sure that we don't miss some of the things. The issue about the digital imaging is still hanging with the technical committee is not aware or maybe having a technical competency of saying that how digital imaging, especially for the imaging of the hematology and the bone marrow, should we get onto that? And verification guidelines, should we follow the international guidelines or should we follow that of the local guidelines? Local guidelines are not available. Next, quality control for the smear. So when we are talking about the quality control for the smear, there is again in individuality which comes there, that whether we are going to do with an automatic or manual, and how will I do the quality control check for the smears itself, including the reticulocyte count. Water quality is a must, and I always feel that the water quality has to be checked by the individual laboratory, whether it is hematology or biochemistry. Now, the big problem comes with the storage for the gel docs, as well as the documentations with that of the bone marrow aspirates and the bone marrow biopsies, where when we look into the NABL 112 guidelines, what has been given, it says sometimes between 5 years to 10 years. So if this is going to be so, then we have to go in for the electronic documentation itself. Next, the problems with that of the third-party QCs in the coagulation and the flow cytometry, whether it is acceptable or not acceptable. Defining of those criteria has to be done with the perspectives of the verifications, what you do in-house. Coming to the organogram, the problems and the issues, what we find as an assessee and an assessor will be the authorized signatories, which I'll not brood about, but definitely we have issues with the authorized signatories over here. Defining the quality manager becomes very easy, no issues. What happens to the remoting during the pandemics or the disasters is again a controversy. We see that most of the reports are having a digital signature, and some digital signatures are by default. Whether the person is available there or not, the reports are coming with the printed reports. Should be accepted or not accepted during the audits? It's a major issues over there. What will happen to the peripheral smear study during the night time in the hospitals or standalone laboratories in the emergencies is again a question. And it is again a spot of ignite for understanding between the clinicians and the hospitals and the accrediting bodies itself. Coming to the methodologies, I had already brooded about it, but we will not go about the top 4. We will go with the 5th one. Coming to the molecular diagnostics, the molecular diagnostics have become a huge thing, especially in the hematology, as well as in the solid tumors. I'm not going to the solid tumors, but I'm coming to the hematological molecular diagnostics. When there is a hematological molecular diagnostics, there is a tussle always between the assessors who have been allocated, whether who is going to do an audit of the molecular diagnostics, respect to that of the hematology. Sometimes there will be a separate assessor depending upon the laboratory, or sometimes there is no assessor for that and the assessor allocated for the hematology is given. Whether it is acceptable, I don't know, because though they may not be competent enough to do the assessment of the molecular diagnostics and the cytogenetics pertaining to the hematology. So the accreditation bodies should also make sure that the assessors are a real group of people who are working in the diagnostic industry for quite some time with the defined criteria, with the technical committees to allocate them properly to that of the assessments of laboratories itself. The reporting methodology in the reports has to be documented. I have seen few of the accredited laboratories issuing the reports without the methodology. And when we ask them, they say that, oh, previous assessors already agreed with this, we don't have. So these are the pros and cons what I have seen in the methodologies itself. Coming to the materials, I think that we have a separate session on method verification where I am not going to go about it. But the question comes here with that of the internal quality controls. The internal quality controls for the hematology CBC analyzers as well as that of the coagulation analyzers can be a second party or the third party, defines according to that of the manufacturer's instructions, and sometimes you may have an open channel where you can also accommodate the third party. There is no issue about the third party mandate use of the internal quality controls in the hematology CBC arena itself. Coming to that of the ECAS and the ILC, I feel that ECAS and ILCs have become robust, especially in hematology, but the issues will come in the flow cytometry where we have the question of stability of the samples itself, which has been provided by the PT provider. Whenever the stability of the ECAS samples are not good, please document very well that putting an email to that of the accredited PT provider whom which you are taking that there is no proper storage or there is a breakage or some things like that, so that you have a documentation to make sure that you have properly communicated to the PT provider itself. Always it is better to have an accredited PT provider so that you don't have any issues when you are going in for international or national accreditation itself. My question is about the peripheral blood ILCs. When you have a peripheral blood ILCs, we do participate in most of the PT providing agencies, but the PT providing agencies gives you the slide. But when you're talking about the QC of that is the PT provider should include the pre-analytical, analytical, and the post-analytical. Why can't we have a system where the smears have been prepared by the laboratory, has been stained, and it has to be sent to a central provider where you can understand whether the staining quality is good or not. This happens in the histopathology by the CAP. The CAP tells you that please process the tissue, send us the slides, we will assess the quality. Similarly, I think the peripheral smear and the reticulocyte also should be assessed for the pre-analytical, analytical, and the post-analytical. What we are doing with the stain slides and the digital imaging is only a competency check to understand whether I can identify that cell, whether I can identify that diagnosis. But it is not providing you the complete quality assurance as per the ISO 15189. This is what I view. Next, most important thing is you have an recognized interlaboratory comparison because you don't have an ECAS provider. The referral lab has going to give you a discrepant values. When you are having a discrepant values from the referral laboratory, what will be the next step? That has to be defined by the laboratory director or the hematology director who's sitting there to say that when I am selecting the referral laboratories for the interlab comparison, if one has got a discrepant values, what will be the next step should be done. So I request people who are in the whole of the participation over here to just think these points to make sure that we have a better quality which can be prepared to ourselves and delivered to our patients itself. Next, most important, which I've already talked, is documentation of the EQA sample quality. Most of us err in that. So I feel that we have to have a small SOP for that if you want, or you want to have a checklist to document how EQA sample quality has to be documented. Now I have got some of the snippets or what you call as a print screen from of the NABL 112 to ponder across ourselves, because this is from the administrative perspective what I'm thinking about. The scope of the accreditation applicable is in the following disciplines. I have already told you what problems we get when you have scope with the hematology, with the flow cytometry, cytogenetics, molecular testing coming under the hematology. Should I put it under the hematology assessors or hematology scope, or should I put across the flow cytometry, cytogenetics, and the molecular testing? The accrediting officers in the NABL have the list of the people who are assessors trained in that particular area. But sometimes it happens so that there's a mix and match, and we have to digest the conflicts which happen on the day of the assessment before the day of the assessment as well as after the assessments also. This conflict resolution becomes very tough and it leads on even to the professional fights itself, which is not needed. Now, I was telling about the documentation storage, and you also have to know like this in hematology, CBC, and clinical, these are the particular time which we have got. So this documentation becomes big difficulty and e-documentation is recommended. I was talking about the molecular testing, gel images, PCR raw data, flow cytometry, it becomes 10 years. HPLC data for 10 years. Why? No need, because when you have 10 years, the electrothermograms, what has been given by these printouts just get evaporated. There'll be just blank papers. Should we take a scan of this or we have to take a backup from your HPLC machines, especially with that of the Biorad machines or the Tosh machines? It's lit controversy over there. Next is the standardization of the coagulation calibration and the standard curve. Again, whenever there is a lot-to-lot changeover, I can accept, but they have to define for how many years. Whether we have to go ahead with that of 1 year or 2 years or 10 years, we have to keep it. Ideally, it should be for 2 years because it completes the cycle of the assessment itself. The raw data and the LJ charts of the values of the IQCs and the raw data, I think this is valid that it should be for about 1 year or till the next assessment, whichever is early. Coming to the reporting of the results, I have already told you the problem comes with that of the digital signatures, which gets on to the default day and night 24 hours laboratory you have got, and every reports get onto that. But if it is an auto-verified document, which we can accept, it's good. But if it is not auto-verified, where it stagnates, it should be having a protocol who is going to sign these reports and release this. Coming to that of the ESRs, the ESRs monitoring of the CV has been removed. It's not mandatory, thanks to that of the technical committee of the hematology who took this stand, and split sample testing has been accepted, and hence there is no need for the laboratories to go for the ECAS or the ILC itself. Next is some of the obsolete tests which has been put across in the NABL, thanks again to them, like the DU test, the LE phenomena, whole blood clotting time has been obsolete and it will not be included in the scope of the accreditation is a welcome. Next, we have got this confusion in your CBC. In your CBCs, they say that the laboratory shall use 2 levels of controls at least once a day. But ideally speaking, the hematology lab should run 3 levels of controls at least once a day, because we have got low, we have got high, we have got even normal. So I always feel that the laboratory should use 3 levels of controls at least once a day to get the feel of it. Next is the inclusion of the MCV, MCH, MCHC should be analyzed with the Bulls algorithm. I would appreciate that if the NABL in the next revision brings about what is called introduce and use the Bulls algorithm plot graph or the tabular column or the root cause analysis for the Bulls algorithm, which facilitates even a laboratory at tier 3 or tier 2 cities itself. These documents are having incomplete information, which I always call this as ABCD. That means that American wasn't confused daisies. And if you are going to take the guidelines from any of the international one, it has to be by default. Now, the next comes in the PT, there is the R value of the correlation study to be about or equal to 0.97. There should be a need to define what is an R value, or a bibliography has to be there here to what calculations which we are going to do, so that it will be easy for us. Since these documents are already on the e-form, if they have a link attached to this document, it becomes easy for any of the laboratories to go ahead. This is very difficult. PT reference range with 20 specimens is okay, but if the reference range does not perform the new study, 60 specimens has to be reconsidered. So this R value to be defined properly in the NABL 112. Establish consensus approved document guidance, which approves what is the product which you have to do, process, services, systems, or the persons. A guideline only refers to that of a piece of an advice which may or may not be adopted as it is. The best practice is defined as a consensus document from that of some associations or in collaborations. It could be the best practice guidelines even from the organization itself. Criteria is just a defined principle for judging, evaluating, or selecting something. So NABL 112 is only the specific criteria. ISO 15189-2012 is a standard. CLSI is a guideline. The best practice policies can be from the ISLH for the peripheral smear review itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Srinivas.
Thank you, ma'am.